Thank you so much. Embarrassing introduction. Good morning. First of all, thank you all for the invitation to participate in the conference. I'm truly delighted to be kicking off day 2 after so many insightful conversations and moments of collective. I've already been introduced. I am Irene Lorenzo Cáceres and I work at Pathways International. And for those of you who don't know our organization, we are a team of experts of very diverse backgrounds. And we work in more than 20 countries to grow pathways to protection and opportunity for refugees and migrants. And in Europe, over the past 3 years, we have been very engaged in the design and piloting of labor and education pathways in Belgium, Ireland, and Italy in the context of the EU Password project, which is also funded by AMIF, just as DT4E. And we have collaborated very with all DT4E actors in the room here today. We are now part of the DT4E 2.0 partnership and are also working in countries like Spain to expand refugee labor mobility for EU member states. But enough about me. I am delighted to welcome 4 brilliant experts who unpack the strengths and weaknesses that we have used to develop pathways for displaced workers in the context of the. We're also going to highlight innovative solutions that could be scaled or adapted across Europe. And we're going to discuss the role of the European Union in facilitating refugee labor mobility. Our conversation is going to be structured into parts. First, we're going to look back and analyze these and challenges of the frameworks we are using to develop pathways for displaced workers today. And after that, we're going to vision for the future and ask ourselves what kind of framework we need to realize that vision. Of course, many of the issues that we're going to hear about in this panel were put on the table yesterday. But the idea of the second day is that we take a moment to explore in depth some of the challenges and some of the problems that we identified yesterday. But before I continue, let me give the floor to our speakers so we can hear from them who they are, what they do, what is their connection to refugee labor mobility. If you dare to break the ice, maybe you can share with us a word or two about what you think the potential of displaced mobility programs is.
Can you hear me? Yes, perfect. Good morning, everyone, and on to day 2. Thanks to everyone for showing up bright and early. It was really great to see so much enthusiasm and engagement yesterday, and I think it's really important going into day 2, like looking at the legal frameworks. And yes, for those who I haven't met, I'm a senior manager in our Fragment Dublin office. Day to day, I work on Irish immigrant, that's my area, but I'm basically involved with the DT4E project in collaboration with me and IOM, and essentially serving as the Irish technical muscle on this project. And you said, Brené, right, to describe our involvement, or two. I think the word I would choose is buy-in. I think it's really important for employers and candidates and for everyone in the room to have a buy-in into the concept and essentially be champions for displaced, talent, advocate that it works, and essentially just occupy every space and talk about it and continue to champion it and make sure that it's, heard and that we're consistently framing it from a storytelling perspective as well. So I think that would be the most important one.
Thank you, Fatima. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here in this beautiful location in Brussels. My name is Jamila El Mazbahi. I'm a lawyer, economic migration, and I work for the Flemish government. I work at the department, and in the policy units, I'm responsible for developing a policy framework for migrant workers, both the workers and the independent professionals. And I'm also holding the pen and writing legislation in economic migration. What is my link with DT4E? My link is to inform IOM and also TBB, our Flemish economic migration policy. Our role is also to facilitate contacts between several stakeholders. And I like to brainstorm about challenges that are faced in the enrollment of the project. If I can pick a word, I think we have to go for a whole of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me in this panel. It's an honor. My name is Paula Alvarez. I am a global thematic specialist on mobility and social inclusion at IOM's newly established global office in Brussels, which is tasked to maintain relations with EU institutions, bodies, and agencies. And in my as a thematic specialist, of course, my link to DT4E is to provide technical thematic support to IOM's missions in their programming concerning labor mobility and inclusion, and RE is one of our flagship programs. I'm very happy to talk about today. In terms of the words, can I say more than one? Yeah. Okay, so for us, I think regular migration pathways, establishing, enhancing, and expanding regular migration pathways. The key is that they are people-centered, rights-based, accessible, safe, and sustainable.
I'm trying the other mic, it works. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mauro Gagliardi. I am the Deputy Head of Units at the European Commission of the team working on legal migration and integration. Joined this team recently. You probably saw my head of unit yesterday, Avella, who was here for the opening. And in the team, we are responsible for developing the EU policies in the areas of legal migration, of course, where resettlement and humanitarian admission play a role, particularly now after the adoption of the pact. And of course, we are also those who are working on the development of including refugee labor mobility schemes, and we are behind as a team of the launch of these have supported the implementation of this very important and this interesting project. What else can I say? Well, I will intervene later and give a bit the perspective of the European Union, maybe in relation to the words concerning refugee labor mobility. I will give you two words and an image which reflects a bit how I feel it, being also relatively new in the is a sunny horizon, because of potential that can be further exploited the European Union level, and I want to give this holistic view of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's start now with our first segment. We're going to take a closer look at pathways that we have been developing to several EU member states, and we're going to add the legal frameworks that they use. Also making the link, of course, to what's happening at the EU level and globally. Let me start by saying that what we see at the moment is a great diversity of approaches to design labor pathways for displaced workers across the world. We see, of course, skilled migration pathways used as a framework, but we also see sponsorship programs, humanitarian corridors, and national protection channels being used as well. But that said, I think something that the vast majority of refugee labor mobility pilots have in common is that they take an existing legal or policy framework as starting point, and they use specific measures, adaptations, or concessions to facilitate access by displaced workers to those frameworks, as we saw yesterday. In Europe, there are some interesting exceptions, like, for example, experiences in Italy and Spain. We see that most countries use existing labor migration channels as framework for displaced labor mobility. And this brings me to Ireland, where Fatima and other partners are working within the Irish employment system to pilot a labor pathway for refugee workers, using facilitation measures in terms of documentation and processing and safeguards. Fatima, what are the advantages of the legal framework that you're using, the critical skills employment permit, and what are some of the limitations that you're facing with this approach?
Thank you, Renee. When we started working on this project and when we looked at Ireland, the pathways in Ireland, we really wanted to explain to employers and stakeholders that Ireland's immigration system is quite green. It is quite business friendly, and it is quite friendly for displaced talent as well. That doesn't mean that there isn't challenges. My colleague Tewin from Talent Beyond Boundaries will know that all too well. We wanted to, basically, when we were looking at the baseline assessment, we wanted to show that the existing framework works and that it works really well, and that the concessions that we were going to ask for and the modifications we were going to ask for were quite small. And I guess before we dive into, the challenges and the benefits, I think it's really important to set the scene for Ireland, because Ireland has a quite young immigration system. We've predominantly been dealing with, economic since early 2000s. So we have a very young system. But despite that, we have a very business-friendly system, which I think is really important in the context of displaced talent, where we're trying to get employers to buy into it, right? And specifically in Ireland, for instance, in last December, we've seen a huge modification into the Irish immigration system in the Department of Enterprise, essentially add additional skills to the critical skills list, as well as that remove additional skills from the list. So what we're seeing is a real push for the government to make it business friendly and to essentially expand that list of roles that are eligible for employment permits. And I guess, why is this important in the context of DT4E and displaced talent? It shows that the government is very pro-migration and is very pro-displaced talent, right? For instance, we've seen roles that are not traditionally eligible for employment permits now being eligible. For instance, mechanics and, HGV drivers, roles like that, that traditionally we wouldn't have done employment permits for, that we're now exploring. And when we looked at the existing framework, we did essentially explore the critical skills employment permit. And in Ireland, it's really important to understand that we don't have a single employment permit process as of yet. We unfortunately haven't signed up to that directive. I'm hoping that we will, but we're not quite a very enthusiastic government. And in terms of, when we are looking to bring displaced talent into Ireland, different government bodies. And that does bring a little bit of a challenge for us. So for instance, if a candidate wants to come to Ireland, we will apply for their Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment first. And I guess from our experience and the experience of our employers, working with the Department of Enterprise, they're quite pragmatic. I think people would agree that they are quite pragmatic and that they do want to do they've bought into the idea of displaced talent. So from our perspective, getting the permit is actually, the existing framework works for Ireland. Getting that, critical skills employment permit is, immigration system facilitates that. What we have when the employment permit to work with the Department of Justice to get the entry visa. Because in Ireland, you need the employment permit to be able to work, and then you need the entry visa in order to travel to Ireland. And we work with the Department of Justice that. What we've seen in our experience, that can be quite, not necessarily impossible, but just trickier. I think it's important to be careful with the language that we're using as well when we're talking about displaced talent, because I think there's always challenges going to arise. But I think in my experience working with the Irish government, that they are quite receptive to this idea. So getting that entry visa can be quite tricky. But the existing framework, the critical skills employment permit, is essentially, it's beneficial. It's in the sense where it's going to lead to long-term residency. For instance, candidates coming in on that permit will, 2 years later, will essentially be on a longer, and then after 5 years, they'll be able to apply for citizenship. And, the most important thing, and I know we discussed it yesterday as well, also gives immediate family reunification, where that's not the case for the general employment permit. So that's why we identify critical skills employment permit as being the preferred route for this talent in Ireland. And I guess the other additional benefit, which people don't realize what the critical skills employment permit is when, it makes the application process a lot smoother. Ireland's immigration system is entirely digital now. Ever since COVID, we post from the Department of Enterprise, there's no need for anyone to sit. Extremely digital, and it is quite friendly. So we identified the critical skills as the preferred route. However, in our experience, it's not always been the route that candidates are eligible for. What we've seen sometimes, employers essentially want to go with roles that aren't necessarily traditionally on the highly skilled list. We've seen a lot of interest in the healthcare sector, in the construction sector, where traditionally they would not be eligible for the critical skills. It would be the general employment permit, but there are always additional concessions to, make those applications and additional requirements that might just be a little time consuming. And I guess, one disadvantage or one challenge with the general employment permit is that there's immediate family reunification, and that sometimes can be a disadvantage for candidates when they want to relocate to Ireland. Ireland has vast experience in recruitment. Employers, do recruit internationally. Part of our pitch, what we wanted to make sure employers would understand is that nothing really changes here. Like, you're still recruiting internationally. You're still going to use the existing framework to be a win-win situation for you, where you have another, pipeline of talent, essentially. And, one of the issues that we did experience with healthcare sector is that the existing, framework that's available doesn't necessarily work, and it's not for purpose, because we're not able to give those candidates the safeguards. So what we're doing is, with my work with tech and TV sessions for those candidates, we've started a pipeline for that. There's still a long way to go when it comes to healthcare in Ireland. We're not as advanced as the work that's been done in the UK NHS, but we are looking at that as a model to replicate in Ireland. Because just to give you some context, at least over 32% of the employment permits issued in Ireland are care roles. So that's huge. And I think it's really important that, with our work with the government, that we're just asking for those concessions. They have been quite receptive to that. For instance, the Department of Enterprise, we do have a dedicated desk in faster processing times. And it's amazing that the Department of Justice were receptive to that and implemented that. And at the, when we do get entry visas issued, for instance, they're processed at our headquarters in Dublin. So the Department of Justice and Department of Enterprise have been quite receptive in terms of making concessions. When we in face of this project is ask for more of those concessions. And the approach we're trying to take with employers to do that advocacy together, because we think it's going to be very strong coming from them directly, them using their business rationale and explaining, why they need modifications to the immigration system, and also what the benefit it is going to be to society. Because you have to, like, healthcare is an issue in most places, but in Ireland, I think it's probably on the news, every day. So it's always on the agenda. So I think, when we do show that business rationale and business justifications, I think the government will be quite receptive to that. So yes, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much. Very interesting to starting to see those trade-offs. You have very or relatively quick access to permanent residence. You have the possibility to maintain family unity, but of course, employer engagement or candidate engagement might be difficult because you're limited to certain salary ceilings and to certain professions that are on the. Let me to you, Jamila. How have you adapted the legal framework to attract that you already had in place in Flanders to promote refugee labor mobility? And what challenges have you faced along the way?
Thank you, Irene. Before I dive into the legal framework, I want to say a word about attracting international talent. in Flanders. So attracting international talent, regardless of the nationality, regardless of the status, is a positive story. It's about giving opportunities, changing lives, and strengthening our economy as a whole. Attracting international talents is one of the solutions to strengthen our labor market. And as a granddaughter and a daughter of migrant workers, I was deeply touched yesterday by the story of Khalid and the release of the new video of DT4E. I'm so thrilled to see so much diversity also in the panel and also in the room. So, legal framework in Belgium. It's important to start with the Belgian constitutional framework. Belgium is a very nice country to live in. It's a small country, but we made it quite difficult. Belgium is a federal state, so it's a federal state. We have 3 regions, 3 communities. We have 6 parliaments and 6 governments. So that is the first. We talk about branding and putting Belgium on the international map with 6 regions, 6 governments, and 3 different regions that are responsible for developing their own economic migration framework. That is a big challenge. A few words about legally accessing Flanders. So the economic policy in Flanders is flexible. We want to attract international talent all over the world. We do not look at the nationality. We do not look at the status of a person. We want to retain talent where there are shortages on our labor. Very flexible policy when it concerns highly skilled professionals. We deliver single permits for 3 years. And we also have a flexible policy when it concerns technical medium skilled profiles that are on the shortage occupation list of migration. They get a single permit for 1 year, but it's renewable. I think it's very difficult in Flanders to balance between more flexibility into the policy framework and tackling the misuse and the abuse of the economic migration framework. Years we had some abuses where migrant workers were exploited, and the economic migration policy is an attractive policy, but it's not the same as cheap labor. So in May, we reviewed the policy and the legislation, and we tried to make balance. Maybe I will give 2 examples. When it comes to tackling misuse and abuse of migrant workers, we added some grounds to refuse permits for financial or economic motive. For example, there is an employer who's fraudulent, they don't have good papers. And for the medium skill profiles and also the low skill profiles, they are still welcome, of course, but we need more documents to check the professional DNA in order to see if there's a match between the employer and the employee. For example, and in the past, didn't have any experience pipe fitting, and that is a very match between the employer and the employee. When it comes to adding more flexibility to the Flemish economic migration framework, we lowered the salary threshold for highly skilled teachers. And we provided a flexible framework for seasonal workers. I think the challenge is an operational one. So we deliver single permits, but regarding the federal state of Belgium, there are 2 entities that are responsible for delivering the single permit. So you have the regional level, we deliver work permits. They are responsible for giving entrance to the Belgian territory. We're facing long waiting times before the application file can be processed. So in Flanders, this month takes around 7 weeks before we can actually start the application file, and for the renewal of the single permit, around 4 to 6 weeks. That's long. At the level of the immigration office, it's quite the same. The answer can be, more staff. At the regional level, of course. At the Flemish level, we have an extra 11 strengthening the operational unit to deliver the single permit, but it's not Belgian government as a whole thing into staff. So we're proud to have these 11 extra people. I think to name one challenge on the policy level, there is an ongoing discussion, and it's good to have that discussion about broadening the occupation list for migrant workers. Today, that list contains 29 professions, and it is renewed or revised every 2 years. I think that is a very interesting discussion that we will certainly have with the next government, since we do not have a government at the moment. A little word about developing non-binding instruments. So you have the legal access, but what happens when the migrant worker or the international talent comes into Belgium? We developed it together with a public employment service video. The name is Your Future in Flanders. Let's make it work. In the room, but I think she's online. She developed a website together with her colleagues of VDAB. We also have some international in the provinces, different provinces in Belgium, so they are a bit spread. I think that the challenge when it comes to the non-binding instruments, we have to look for a more structural thing, because giving a softening to international talents is a very important one. Integration and learning the language is also very, very important in order for the international talent to feel himself at home. We do not want him to feel alone. I remember Khalid, he said yesterday, I felt alone the first TBB and IOM are my family. I found it was very, very emotional, very beautiful to say. I want to say more things, but I think I will the mic to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll just highlight, the common, there is a list of occupations, but if it's not updated and it doesn't reflect the labor market reality, it's useless. Or the importance of integration, and also how you balance accessibility with preventing exploitation, which is something that also came up yesterday. Okay, now that we have the subnational and the national perspective, we're good. And of course, although this is an area of shared competence between EU institutions and member states, we heard how the European Commission has been actively promoting refugee labor mobility since 2020, including through political engagement, building common infrastructure like the talent pool, and of course, AMI funding to pilot projects like DT4E. Mauro, what have been the Commission's priorities to facilitate, and what is your overall assessment of the current EU framework? It's fit for purpose when it comes to enabling access to displaced workers to the EU?
Thank you, Irene, and thanks to colleagues for their interview. Very, very insightful and useful. Really, thank you. Understanding and ensuring that the European Union system is fit for purpose is actually quite a difficult question to answer. We have heard about the complexity of the Belgian constitutional infrastructure, well, multiplied by 27, but not all countries are so complex, though. The result for the European Union. So this already gives you the indication of the complexity that we need to face in order to cater for the different needs and sensitivities of member states, but also, of course, of the civil society, of the employers, and all the stakeholders that are involved in the process. pathways as such. So even entering into specifically displaced talents has been and continues to be the European Commission. And although, you know, we are in a moment of transition institutionally right now, because we are waiting for the new Commission to be nominated and take office, I'm pretty sure this topic will remain quite high on the migration agenda. We have been active on various fronts to try to expand and make complementary pathways grow over the years. I will learn in a moment. You also heard, as Irene recalled, several points from Anita yesterday, but these are very important because they define the current situation at the European level. But first of all, let me stress that the Commission alone cannot do much. We need, and we have heard, as I said, very interesting perspective and experience, and many others are in the room and out there. We need international organizations, civil society. We need a lot of actors to work all together. I think whole of government was mentioned as one of the key words. We cannot agree more. I cannot agree more. We cannot do much as Commission, so we are really looking for these tips. Focusing on what has been done so far. The legal framework at Union is very much of a soft one when it comes to refugee mobility. Contrary to resettlement before, for which we actually have a regulation specifically regulating that since June this year. So our soft law architect based on the recommendation on legal pathways that the Commission put forward in 2020. It is an overarching policy framework that continues to steer our work and complements other activities that operation. As part of this recommendation, the Commission has encouraged to explore how to leverage skills, qualification, as well as the motivation in need of international protection and facilitate access to existing legal avenues for those in need. Because in the end, the perspective on which we have been working, that complementary pathways should make it easier to access the avenues that exist for a refugee situation of vulnerability. And we know that there are very different practices across the member states. Based on humanitarian tools, or for instance, the single permits that was also mentioned earlier, and that is very relevant in the context of the DT4E. This is clearly at the European Union level, and for us, a field of innovation and exploration. We are learning by doing. This project is one of the examples, but clearly for us, there is the concept of additionality that is important to promote and preserve. We need to keep the space of protection of resettlements, and we need to add on, to the extent that we are able to, together with the European Union member states, also avenues or quotas or opportunities for displaced talents. Sorry. So further to the recommendation that we put forward in 2020, we've also been providing funding to support pilot projects. And probably you in the room know that as it was announced, Global Refugee Forum, in January 2023, we launched a new set of call for proposal to pilot projects in this area. We are indeed still, I would say, at the phase of pilot projects. Among other priorities, two of the projects have a focus on complementary pathways, including a follow-up to these projects that we have discussed. So we are benefiting from insight and the experience of projects that we have been financing and promoting in the previous years. And we hope that the experience that we are getting out will be able to feed the policy making and the policy reflection that we are having, and that I hope will also accelerate soon with the new Commission. Let me stress again the role of the member states when it comes to opening up these opportunities, because in the end they are the ones that give or not access to the territory to displaced talents and all other people need for protection. We are continuing to engage at technical and political level with member states, as well as like-minded outside EU. And you may recall the fact that our current Commissioner for Migration and Home Affairs, Ylva Johansson, convened the first high-level discussion on refugees at EU level in the context of the high-level forum on legal pathway to protection that took place in November 2022. So there has been, and we are trying to keep that momentum. I would probably close it here. I wanted to say a couple of words on the EU talent pool, but maybe we can keep it for later, just to stress the importance that it has in facilitating the matching between displaced talents and employers here in the European Union. But this is something that was raised also yesterday, I understand, and in any case, maybe an opportunity later during the discussion. Thank you.
Mauro, I've kept words of your intervention out there with all the list of words we're making. One is soft law, and the other one is additionality, member states as well. Paola, IOM is working very closely with EU member states, institutions, and governments in all regions to harness the potential of migration through regular means, expanding and diversifying opportunities for safe and regular migration. What key recommendations or good practices or insights can you share that are relevant to the European context, particularly when it comes to the frameworks that facilitate displaced talent mobility?
Thanks, Irene, for that question. And thank you to my fellow panelists for their attentions. They are very inspiring and help me with my points here. I think, well, of course, IOM is working tirelessly to expand, enhance, establish, support member states to establish regular pathways. There's a need to connect individuals with safe and regular migration opportunities. And this is, of course, not only because of the structural and emerging labor shortages, as we all know, and skill imbalances. So one point I wanted to mention around the world is regular and is linked work. And in IOM, one of the strategic priorities of IOM strategic is facilitating regular migration pathways, along with saving lives and driving solutions to displacement. And we really, truly believe displaced people have skills, talents, experiences that can fill in some of these needs. We found through a study in 2022 that 30 of the largest economies were facing labor shortages that cost around $1 trillion. And complementary are an opportunity to connect those skills and talents and also long-lasting solutions for people who are in need of international protection. In terms of what recommendations we have heard about the need for more of the national systems, the regional and international frameworks to facilitate of pathways. There are, we heard from these experiences at the national level, operational challenges linked to regulatory frameworks that relate to eligibility, documentation, financial requirements, processing times, skills assessment, skills matching on record. Of course, these are not, some of these are not substantially different from the challenges that refugees and migrants experience when they are already in the countries of destination. But I think pilots of like DT4E and the experiences of Flanders and Ireland also tell us that there are some key elements, and some of you used words that are underlying this, well, labor mobility in general, but also the pathways in particular. And one of the things that I really, from the interventions and the experiences of DT4E, is that building on existing frameworks and mechanisms within skills-based programs is not only and solution likely to adversity. Of course, this, and we heard the types of adaptations that we need, like flexibility on documentation requirements, maybe on travel and identity documents, maybe on proof of education or work experience, maybe on language requirements, but also, for example, on labor market tests, which is another very particular point at the national level. We also heard the importance of evidence-based forward-looking and labor market systems, considering the current needs, but also future needs. In the case of Ireland, of course, there's, you know, example of a very key sector that is the healthcare sector. But, you know, in Europe, we are also in society. The Commission has also put forward feasibility studies for example, workers, but also, you know, all the feasibility to support innovation through startup founders and many other examples. So I think the important thing here is also that these schemes embed development considerations at their core. And there is work and collaboration also with third countries, for example, to support skills development measures also in the countries of first asylum or in the countries of origin, train to models, strengthening training and vocational education systems and institutions. Another key point, and this is linked also to long-term options, is the rights-based approach and ensuring the right migrants, in this case, displaced talents, are upheld. And this, I think the role of employers, as you know, mentioned Fatima, it's not only key in identifying the skills or in developing labor market responsive training curricula, but it's also fundamental in operating this rights-based approach and ensuring ethical recruitment practices, fair working conditions. Another key point that we heard is accessibility. Accessimation, for example, on the available pathways, and awareness raising for candidates, but also for employers about the opportunities, but also the requirement. What does that entail? And this along the migration continuum. For example, on requirements, process, entitlements, obligations. And I think the examples that we heard from Ireland on using digital solutions, or in Flanders, you know, these international houses are very examples of how this could concretely work operationally. Language training is another key issue, and we heard it in the case of Belgium as well. From the very early stages, this starts prior to departure. And this is why I think the language training should not be just looked at something that it's, you know, done when the candidates arrive. It should be really embedded in the design of these systems. And it's an investment. It's not only about learning the language, it's also about testing, you know, and build these training programs in a very comprehensive way so that they also include this language component. Another point is the recognition of qualifications and skills validation. Here, I'm happy to say that the European issued a recommendation on the recognition of qualifications of third country nationals last year. And I think added value of that recommendation is precisely that it detaches a little bit from only, you know, professional qualifications. It really puts the emphasis on the skills first approach, and most importantly, on cooperation with third countries to make that happen. And then I think my last point is really about an integrated approach and to put integration at the core of the design of these schemes. So it's not only about individual mobility. We heard about the importance of looking at this from a very comprehensive lens, touching upon all spheres of life. Family unity is a key as an integrated support. It's also key, but we tend to, in the design, we tend to put this integration approach at the pre-departure stage and very, you know, at the early post-arrival stages, and not look at it as a process. You know, it's evolving. It's a process that involves not only the individualities, it's a take time, not only 12 months after the arrival, but even, you know, years after arrival. Here, for example, the European Action Plan on Integration and Inclusion puts this emphasis on how it's integration and inclusion for with a migratory background. Even for the communities, integration requires mutual adjustments. Yeah, sometimes, of course, require individualized support. Sometimes it will require adjustments to mainstream services to cater to more diverse populations like the European societies are becoming. So I leave it here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paula. Time check to see how much time we have for the second round, because we started late. We're fine. Yeah. Okay. How much? Overall? Okay. Okay. Great. So we're going to move on and have a quicker round of interventions about the future. Now that we have heard the advantages and the limitations of the approach or approaches that we're using so far to pilot refugee mobility, I'm going to ask all of you, and of course also all of you in the audience and online, to take a step back and ask yourselves two questions. One is, what is our vision for refugee labor mobility 10 years from now, or say 20? And two, are legal and policy frameworks that we're using today, the approaches we're using today, going to help us realize that? And if not, what do we need to change in order to expand existing pathways and bring them to scale? Of course, limits to scale mean the legal frameworks of the countries of destination per se. Because, for example, if we had more and more diverse and more inclusive and accessible channels for workers at all skills levels, not only for high-skilled workers, like it's the case in many, that would also benefit refugee workers. That's clear. We could also come to the conclusion that we have the right frameworks for refugee workers to enter the EU, but those frameworks do not allow them to build a sustainable future or realize their potential or thrive or really innovate in the EU because of temporary status, because of the lack of family unity, as you were saying, etc. And this is also, could ask ourselves if we have the right frameworks to welcome and integrate displaced workers, and whether we can connect to elements of other frameworks, like, for example, understanding employers as sponsors or borrowing from community sponsorship to create a welcoming environment, which is a precondition for the success of our programs. And of course, just to conclude, you'll know that this is not all about having the right frameworks on paper. This is about implementation, including who implements and how, with what resources. And we shouldn't forget that this is not only about the frameworks in countries on the front end of the pathways as well, and see if there is an enabling environment in countries of first asylum, whether we have partnerships that are truly win-win countries of departure and the governments of countries of departure and all actors there. So I'm going to now turn to our panelists and hear their thoughts on this complex set of, it's going to be very interesting. And I'm going to start. Jamila, you're planning changes to the Flemish economic migration policy frame in the near future to attract more international talent. You already highlighted some of those changes before. How are those reforms going to facilitate more refugee labor mobility? And what else do you think should be done to bring this path now that has been open in the context of DT4E scale?
Is it on? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Irene. If we look at the legal access standards in Belgium, there are some things that are in the pipeline already. The new single permit directive is already mentioned by Mauro. It's good news that we are already started with some drafting sessions with the regions and the immigration office in order to transpose the directive, and hopeful on time this time. Last time we were a few years late. Yeah, small detail. Second thing that I want to stress that we are waiting for the resultant study of the OECD. So we applied for the technical support instrument of the DJ reform, and we asked for reviewing the Flemish economic migration framework in order to develop policy recommendations. Waiting for the study, and we're talking with the OECD and the stakeholders. When it comes to the whole of government approach, a very important one, I would like to stress some things. I think integration and learning Dutch is very important. There, a legislative framework is very to start learning Dutch abroad. It was mentioned by Rob yesterday. The recognition of qualifications and diplomas, it's a challenge. When it comes to displaced talents, I would like to mention a very important instrument, European instrument. It is, I don't think I've heard it yesterday or today. It's the European Qualification Passport for Refugees. It is an international tool, and it contains two parts. You have an assessment part and you have an inquiry part. And I think it's not binding, but I think the government has a role to recognize. In European Union developed this tool. I think we should use it for displaced talent. If I can just talk about the EU level. So yesterday there was a suggestion to make a directive for displaced talents. I think on the level of the Flemish government, we had some European directives in the past, and now we are transposing the single permit directive. We transposed the blue card directive. There is also a directive for seasonal workers, directive for students, doctoral researchers, intra-corporate transfer. I think it's very difficult to make a difference between the different categories. It's very complex also for the employer to know the processing times for example, a blue card, a qualified worker or a seasonal worker. So I think if I just make a suggestion at a European level, maybe it's interesting to develop a European framework attracting international talent, and maybe there can be a difference between the highly skilled and the seasonal workers. But it's so interesting to make just one framework in the legislation clear for the society. I don't know if I still have some up to say. I will just.
Thanks a lot. I already see one of the dilemmas. Do we use what exists and make it more inclusive, or do we need specific dedicated tools, at least until the frameworks are inclusive enough, right? I have an answer to the question, I don't, but I would welcome all of you to think about it and to chip in the discussion after. Paola, IOM's vision for refugee labor mobility to the EU 10 years from now? Very easy question. And how can we leverage what we already have and also, think about that help us realize?
Glad I the easiest one. Thank you. No, I think what I want to say is that making skills-based programs more accessible and more inclusive, including of people in need of international protection, has great potential and benefits. And we need to see more. It's a policy. These touch upon different policy dimensions, from the humanitarian to development, employment, education, integration, along a continuum that go from countries of origin, countries of first asylum, countries of destination, etc. So not an easy task, it's complex. These pathways put this question, coherence between internal, external dimension and all these policy domains. I also think that we have the opportunity, I mean, there are many pilots and DT4E is also testing some solutions. And I think we really need to build on the lessons learned from these pilots and recognize the opportunities and challenges these pilots have shown us. And continue adapting other frameworks in order to facilitate this type of pathways. I also think all of this requires good monitoring and evaluation frameworks, a lot of goodwill and effort to share experiences. This kind of platform is an example. There's also force on refugee labor mobility, where the Commission has joined and can share experiences beyond the European borders with other countries. But with the EU, there is also the labor migration platform that provides yet another instance for discussion and for sharing experiences. Overall, this requires enhanced and sustained dialogue across all the different stakeholders that are involved in facilitating this type of pathways.
I totally agree. I think overcoming policy silos is really one of the key challenges we have at the national level, what you were saying about having to talk to formats. And we need more spaces where all different actors can come together and have the discussion, not only at the global for this event, but also at the national or even sub-national level. Fatima, from the national level, would you say that the Irish domestic legal framework works? We know it works for the pilot phase, but does it work in the long term, or do we need policy change, or, as we were saying, specific instruments or reforms that displaced talent and ensuring their access to the Irish labor market?
Right on cue, it starts raining as we talk about Ireland. So I do think the existing framework works. And that doesn't mean that we don't need modifications and enhancements. We certainly do. One thing we have in Ireland, a call for submissions every year. And that's actually, we have it twice a year, where the government, publicly announced that employers and stakeholders can make submissions to the Department of Enterprise if they want to up a list or if they want to add roles to the critical skills employment permit list. And I think this is the perfect opportunity for employers and stakeholders to advocate for certain sectors are required in sectors where we're currently experiencing a lot of issues hiring that talent. For instance, construction being one in Ireland, and then healthcare being the other. We held an event, I think almost a year and a half, employers, stakeholders, to basically come talk to us about displaced talent, where we would provide them information. And to be very honest with you, I was overwhelmed by the responses from everyone, where I've seen basically roles that we traditionally look at, where people are looking to hire for, you know, people in zoology, plasters, electricians. So I think what we need to do is put an emphasis on employers and stakeholders basically asking for modifications for certain employment permits. So for instance, Ireland holders of general employment permits for their spouses to market, right? So that's an amazing enhancement, and that's something that was really welcomed by everyone in Ireland. So what we need to see is one step further, where we're making it attractive for people to be on the general employment permit, because now what we're seeing is everyone prefers to be on the critical skills, but a lot of shortages are where the general employment permits are. So we need to make it attractive for employers and, you know, candidates to be able to permit. And I think it's really important that for governments to be part of that discussion as well, and to be open and transparent about what modifications can be made. Tight in certain sectors to ask for modifications. And I guess maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think we probably will get there in Ireland. I think it's just going to take a little bit of time. And I think with this initial project, we've put in the groundwork right now, and for the last 3 years, and you know, government and everyone knows about the project now. So I think the phase that we're moving into now is asking smaller modifications and enhancements to make it more accessible for a lot of sectors, healthcare and construction being one. So that's it from the Irish perspective.
Thank you so much. Yeah, on the who implements, I think, you know, it's a clear answer in terms of we need employers to advocate with us to governments. That's a point. Last but not least, let's hear from Mauro. We all know that the top priority right now at the Commission is to implement the pact. But the guidelines also say that managing migration through a firm approach is going to enable to open up legal migration pathways based on the skill needs in Europe. And of course, closing the skills gaps is also a priority in the Dragon report that was released earlier this week. So how are you planning to connect all of these priorities to continue growing legal pathways and including pathways?
Thank you, Irene, to everybody for the interventions and the reflection. Maybe I will immediately start. So I will try to cover 3 points and make your life easier on timekeeping. First of all, because this is a subject that has emerged yesterday, it has emerged today, to react on that. And I will actually react by asking you, if you allow me, to give us the elements for this reflection. I don't think there is any closed door to any idea, of course. But as you know, the European Union acts when there is an added value at the European Union level, when we can bring something to all the member states as a whole. So it's true that for the moment we have the, let's say, on legal migration. Maybe one day there will be something on displaced talent. I really don't know. But if we want to go in that direction, if there is a push from the society direction, we need to have the real justification for intervention at the Euro. We are better placed than member states to do it, since they know better what are their needs. The job market. The job markets are different across Europe. Let's not even talk about a global. This is a bit a sort of question that I will bring back to you, give back to you for further reflection, and happy to discuss it further Second, so we don't have for the moment any plan for such legislation. I think it's quite clear. I'm happy to discuss that. But clearly there is also, as it was by Irene, a very clear direction, well, a very clear direction that was given by the president-elect political guidelines, which go into the direction of looking further into facilitating the arrival of the talent and skills we need in the European Union. But let's not forget that there is another very important policy objective too. We as Commission and European Union would like to continue promoting, which is ensuring that the opening up always are also a tool to offer alternative to irregular migration pathways. And as you know, that in the political environment we are, this is a very important element to take into account. And we will continue, you may know, that also as part of the Global Alliance Against Migrant Smuggling that was in November 2023, promoting alternatives to smuggling, essentially, of migrants is an important component. Third and last point, it is about the sustainability. We need we have a legal for states that provide opportunities. Of course, it can be improved, but it is also important, and maybe scale, but it's also important that operationally the activities cannot, in the end, that's what counts for the individuals we are talking about. And it is not only about the resources, it is also about ensuring that there is an overall that allow for that. The EU talent pool is an example because it would facilitate the matching, but also the practical experience that you are having. Activities like these projects that are taking place around the world are very important so that we understand how best design the process and establish also the structure and the infrastructure we need for that. And we need to look into the synergy in order to make these activities sustainable. On funding, because of course it is the other big element concerning sustainability. What for the moment we have been able to fund is not really something that can be scaled up with the resources that we have. We are very much, but also, and this is something that as European Commission we do in all the areas, we also need to see how these schemes and activity self-sustainable. So how also with involvement of the employers, with the involvement of civil society organization, international organizations, build up systems can self-sustain themselves, of course, with our support in them off and somehow prolonging to a certain extent they are working. However, the element, of course, just let me stress, totally agree on what was said, the element of the importance of coordination and the role of fight exploitation in order to make sure that these pathways are successful not only for bringing people and talent to Europe, but that there is a long-term perspective and a durable solution.
Thank you so much, Mauro. We have to take a good note of. I don't know if we have time for one question from the audience. Who dares? Up.
There is one question online from Emilia Bratanova. She's asking to beneficiaries of labor mobility pathways applying for asylum in this country.
That's a very good question. Thank you. I think what we wanted to avoid was, candidates coming to the host country and ending up in a position where they have to apply for asylum. We want to avoid that. We don't want that to happen to anyone. When I'm looking at it from the Irish perspective, there are safeguards in place for candidates if for one reason or another they, redundant or they're terminated or for one reason or another are employed. One of the mechanisms in place is that they can request temporary permission to a country in order for them to seek alternative options. And then they can do that through, a Department of Enterprise. They will grant that eligible for that. They could also potentially the Department of Justice and request a temporary permission to remain as well. And this is something that's consistently employers as well. Employers want to make sure that if they're investing in that there are safeguards in place for those candidates coming to the country. I think we really need to work closely with the government in terms of getting concessions and safeguards, because we don't want to be in a position where the candidate has left with no other choice but to claim some. Of course, that is there, legally speaking, it is there, but we want to avoid all costs and make sure that there are safe for those people. I don't think it's a positive place to be for candidates and when they're in that situation. So there's a lot of support involved that doesn't happen.
Thank you so much, Fatima. Somebody else wants to come in?
From the Belgium level, an interesting question also. The new single permit directive gives some procedural guarantees for migrant workers. Legislation when the migrant, a lot of lights. In the current legislation, the migrant worker that falls without a job, for other reasons he does not have a job, 3 months, and that is not a lot, 3 months to find another job. We are thinking in the drafting sessions with the Immigration Office and the regions, we're thinking about making the search term at 3 months more. And there are some European procedural guarantees because I think we're talking about national talent, displaced talent. There is a possibility for them to ask for asylum, but we want them to continue working on our labor market. So that is definitely one of the critical points that we're discussing now and in the future.
Thanks so much, Emilia.
Thank you very much for the question. This is a question that I think puts the emphasis on the importance of building that institutions such as IOM are working with. It's not only important to, besides, of course, the safeguards that should be embedded in the design of the schemes. I think there is groundwork that it's very important on building the capacity of the country to understand the procedures, entitlements, obligations, at the same time, the capacity of employers to know and rights, obligations, entitlements, and also preparing communities to support in the
for reminding us of the agency that is at the core of refugee labor mobility. We have to leave so much. All our please a round of applause, and we can continue the conversation, of course, during the coffee break.